There are individuals who spring up in every generation who inspire in such a way that humanity as a whole can't help but take note. Their actions call for change for the better, challenge the status quo, and all in all make us better today than we were yesterday. By taking the time to dissect the principles and characteristics of these key figures and the work that they've accomplished, it allows us to begin to see the world a bit more as they did and take actions that we might never have taken otherwise. This is Processed, a series that explores the many facets of creativity through dissection and execution. In this episode, we dive into the space between the lines in one of the most iconic speeches in history and explore the thought process of the influential man behind its words. Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech is arguably one of the most iconic speeches in modern history. Delivered on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial to an audience of over 250,000 people during the 1963 March on Washington, King's speech was a watershed moment in the American Civil Rights Movement. And surprisingly, its four most memorable words were completely and entirely off the cuff. King's famous speech, lasting 17 minutes and comprised of around 1,600 words, was delivered at a time of massive unrest and turmoil. Its words were a culmination of events both witnessed and experienced firsthand. In a time when it was needed most, Dr. King stepped up as a clear leader and advocate for social change. If we were to shine a light on even a portion of King's resume, we'd find more than enough accolades to qualify him for his role. It was apparent that he was an educated man of action, and that when the work needed to be done, he was more than willing to step up. In a time where others were advocating for freedom by any means necessary, including violence, King led nonviolent movements in the late 1950s and 60s, striving to achieve legal equality for African Americans in the United States. He served as a spokesman for the Montgomery bus boycott, which sought to integrate the city's bus lines. After over a year of campaigning and fighting for what was right, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that racial segregation in transportation was unconstitutional. Among his many accomplishments was the famed Letter from a Birmingham Jail, which was a manifesto of his philosophy and tactics, which today is required reading in universities worldwide. And at 35, Martin Luther King Jr. became the youngest person to win the Nobel Peace Prize. The acceptance speech he gave is said by many to be one of the most powerful remarks ever delivered at that event. It's clear that King wasn't afraid to roll up his sleeves or to get his hands dirty with the work. He saw glaring injustice in the world that needed to be made right, and he set out to do so through his message of unity, perseverance, and hope. The passion for these ideals weren't just footnotes in King's life story. They were the primary driving force behind why he did what he did. In a commencement address at Oberlin College in 1965, King declared, "No individual can live alone. No nation can live alone. We are tied together." He believed that perseverance meant doing what was right and never stopping. In his final speech delivered in Memphis, Tennessee, King stated, "For when people get caught up with that which is right and they are willing to sacrifice for it, there is no stopping point short of victory." And on the day before he was assassinated, Dr. King addressed a group of sanitation workers on strike. "But I know somehow that only when it is dark enough can you see the stars." With the stage set for one of the biggest marches to date in the nation's capital, King had the structure, experience, and passion in place to address the masses that would come together by the thousands that day. And yet, even with the vast importance placed on that march, a fully realized version of his speech had yet to be completed. King and his advisors worked meticulously into the early hours of the morning, writing and rewriting the final penned version of the speech. It was said that the typed-out version that King took to the podium that day wasn't completed until 4 a.m. and was originally titled "Normalcy, Never Again." And the famous four words that everyone knows were nowhere on its pages. While the dream rhetoric we've all come to know and love is most famous for finding its way into King's delivery that day, it was something he had used many times prior in earlier speeches. The clear passion and drive of a man whose dreams dictated his powerful and influential actions. The night before the speech, King's advisor, Wyatt Walker, suggested he not use any of that dream stuff during the March on Washington speech, calling it trite and cliche. The last to speak that day, King started from his prepared text. A majority of his speech made reference to the Bible, the Constitution, and the Declaration of Independence. And while the words he spoke from the carefully crafted text in front of him were eloquent and intentional, they were far from the fiery and charismatic delivery for which Dr. King was so well known. As he neared the end of his speech, he came to a section that he felt wasn't quite right. He skipped a few lines here and a few lines there, read some of the words written on the page, then skipped a few more words. He then quickly improvised. Go back to Mississippi, go back to Alabama, go back to South Carolina, go back to Georgia, go back to Louisiana, go back to the slums and ghettos of our northern cities, knowing that somehow this situation can and will be changed. Just then, Malia Jackson, a gospel singer and friend of King's, shouted out, "Tell them about the dream, Martin." King stopped and looked out over the sea of people congregated there that day. The hard work he and others had poured out into the last handful of years culminated to this point. The words prepared in front of him painted so well a picture of the wrongs that were pleading to be made right. The experience and expertise of his past as a social leader and advocate for change was woven intricately into the speech on the paper before him. And yet, at that moment, Dr. King remembered his fire. He remembered his drive, his passion, his purpose. At that moment, Dr. King remembered his dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but the content of their character. I have a dream that one day every valley shall be exalted, every hill and mountain shall be made low, the rough places will be made plain, and the crooked places will be made straight. When we allow freedom to ring, when we let it ring from every city and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, great God Almighty, we are free at last. It was King's prayer and deepest hope to see a world united. It was his passion that brought people together to fight for what was right. And while it was his relentless pursuit for justice that placed him in pivotal roles to make actual change for the better, it was his dream that set him apart as a man who will forever be remembered. Most of us may never find ourselves addressing an audience of 250,000 people on the National Mall or implementing social change on a level that will resonate for future generations. But chances are we all have hopes and goals and dreams. And if King has taught us anything, it's that it's your hopes and passions that people resonate with. It may be your hard work and dedication and willingness to step up that gets you that audience, but it's your dreams that will set you apart. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this episode and you want to stay up to date with all things process, please subscribe if you aren't already. And if you'd like to support this series, you can do so on my Patreon page, which is listed below. Patrons get a behind-the-scenes peek at upcoming episodes, as well as a monthly vlog that documents the creation of this series. Thank you again, and I'll see you in the next episode.